Well, hello, my name is Dyck. I'm one of the editors on buildingchurchleaders.com, and I'm sitting here with my good friend Doug Franklin, who is the founder and president of LeaderTrex. We're at LeaderTrex right now. It's an awesome organization that specializes in leadership development for young people, and they take them on trips all over the world. And Doug also speaks at many youth conferences around the country. He is a former youth pastor as well. And he's written a new book called The Disconnect. And what it's about is bridging this gap between the youth pastor and the senior pastor, which is a notoriously troubled relationship often. So I guess my first question for you, Doug, is how did you stumble upon this topic? What got you interested in this?
I think stumble on the topic is actually a really good way of putting it, because what ended up happening is as I was speaking around the country and interacting with youth pastors over this topic of leadership development, they would build some trust with me, and then pretty soon they would start to tell me these stories of pain, these stories of missed expectation, how they had come to this church and had wanted a mentoring relationship with the senior pastor, and it turned out that they never even talked to the senior pastor, or the senior pastor always took the side of parents, or never had much faith in them, and there was a lot of hurt, and I kept hearing these stories of hurt. And so as these stories continued, I realized, hey, there's something going on here. And I began to talk to other people and found out, yeah, this is a big issue in youth ministry. And so I started interviewing senior pastors about why this was going on, and youth pastors, and started to put together a lot of information. And as I did, it just dawned on me there is a need to provide some resources to help senior pastors and youth pastors just get on the same page with one another.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned some of them already, like youth pastors expecting to maybe be mentored by a senior pastor. That doesn't happen. What are some of the other common frustrations you heard from youth pastors, youth ministers?
I'm never evaluated. No one ever tells me what I'm doing well. I'm only told what I'm doing bad. The senior pastor doesn't support me, always takes the parent side. This is one of the most common ones. This is kind of interesting, where the youth pastors would tell me every interaction with the senior pastor was about numbers. And I said, well, how does that work? Because it doesn't seem like most senior pastors are really into numbers to me. And they would say, well, the senior pastor sees me and says, how's it going? And I would tell the senior pastor, I only have a second or two, so I'd say, well, it's going well. We had 25 students at youth group. And then the senior pastor says, well, it sounds good, and walks away. And the youth pastors would walk away from those encounters going, I only cares about numbers. But the reality is that they didn't really know what to talk about. It's hard to talk about transformation. No one says in a 30-second conversation, so what transformation's been taking place in your youth ministry? So they always talked about numbers, and so youth pastors thought, oh, all senior pastors really care about is numbers. But when we talked to senior pastors, what we found out was it really wasn't about numbers. It was about, I don't know what to talk about when I run into somebody in the hallway at church.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense, and numbers are tangible. It's
right. It's an easy thing to talk about.
Yeah. I can see how they'd miss each other on that. How about senior pastors? What are some of their frustrations they have with their youth pastors?
Yeah, you hired someone to do a job. They should be able to do the job. But the truth is, most of what college prepared youth pastors to do was to write lessons, think about the philosophy of youth ministry, think about how students learn. No one ever went to a class on how to run a parent meeting, or how to train your small group leaders, or this one, how to lead inside of a church budget, or how to stay inside of a church budget, or how to actually do the paperwork that goes into finances around a church. And so youth pastors tend to disappoint their senior pastors by not being able to do the little things. And those little things lead to mistrust. And they lead to assumptions. And they lead the senior pastor to think the youth pastor just says nobody's doing. And in a lot of cases, they're right on the small things.
And those little things are often big things, right?
Right, they're big things. Money, budgets, parents, those are all big things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You write in the book about expectations.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about those expectations and how they're often not met.
Yeah. Let's just give you an example. Most youth events involve some form of caffeine. So you're taking junior hires, you're loading up with caffeine and sugar, and you're doing a high intense activity. You're playing a game, you're doing something. That combination is going to lead to mishaps, broken bones, and bad things happening, right? But that's part of what youth ministry is about. But senior pastors, I think, sometimes have the expectation that everything will be done in a safe and easy way. And youth ministry is messy. When you're dealing with students and the things that they're going through in life, it's going to be messy sometimes. It's not going to be that clean. And especially if you put students in charge of something, it's going to be really messy.
Sure.
And I think the same thing is true for senior pastors. One senior pastor told us a story about how he'd gotten a call from parents saying, hey, we're trying to reach the youth pastor about what's happening in the youth ministry. We don't hear back from him. And when he talked to his youth pastor, the youth pastor said, oh yeah, I don't return phone calls of parents. I gave them a calendar at the beginning of the year. You know,
wow.
And so there's just these mixed expectations all the way along. And a lot of it has to do with youth pastors, don't know what they're doing. And senior pastors don't have the time to sort of walk them down the road of how you deal with people in church. And youth pastors get in trouble.
Yep. Yeah. If take an example, say, of a youth pastor and a senior pastor that are really missing each other.
Yep.
The relationship's broken. There's not a lot of trust.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to a youth pastor and senior pastor like that? How can they just start heading back in a good direction?
Yeah. Well, we actually put 5 exercises in the book that they can do together to start, one, good communication, to get a really good understanding of each other, and to really begin to understand how you work with each other. And in the book we talk about this, but we talk about understanding each other's values and then trying to live inside of those values for each other. And so some of the things that I think are really important that most senior pastors and youth pastors don't do is spend some social time together. You know,
like outside of church.
Outside of church, yeah. Go play putt-putt. Go do something fun. Go do go-karts or whatever, or go to a museum together, or go to something together. Do something outside of work that allows the two of you to get to know each other on a real human level. And I think that in itself can do a lot. I think another thing that can be done is talk about hard things. You know, have a conversation about money. Money in churches is something that senior pastors and youth pastors don't talk about at all. And it creates a lot of jealousy and tension. When the senior pastor wants something done, when he has a vision for something and he needs some resources, he goes to the church and the church usually says yes. The youth pastor needs something that he thinks is really important to helping students grow. He asks the church and he hears no.
Different story.
Different story. And it's based on trust, and it's based on position and a whole bunch of different things. But the youth pastor a lot of times can look at the senior pastor and say, he doesn't understand my resource needs or my financial needs. You know, also too is talk about finances together. Most youth pastors are younger, and they're struggling in debt sometimes. They're struggling with finances. They're struggling with a young family. In the process of doing these interviews, I met a youth pastor at a fairly large suburban church, almost 1,000 people. And his wife had come to him and said, honey, I just found out we qualify for food stamps. And he was heartbroken over it. He had been working at the church for 4 years, or maybe almost 5, and no one had ever talked to him about a raise. No one ever talked to him about it. And so he went to his senior pastor and he said, I got to tell you, my wife just told me this. We qualify for food stamps and we need them. And this pastor never knew this guy's situation because the elders had dealt with his salary issues. And he said that immediately the senior pastor got an elder involved and they were able to help him financially, which was a great story. But a lot of times, youth pastors and senior pastors are never talking about these issues, and we all know the tension that finances can create in someone's life. And so this is something that they can do as well too. Talk about some hard things. Also too is, you know, senior pastors and youth pastors are actually ministering to the same families, but just from different ends. And they can oftentimes be on a different page. In youth ministry, we talk about big church and little church. You know, big church is the big worship service, and then we're little church. And it creates divisions, but actually we're ministering to the same families. So there could be a lot of discussion about how we're going to minister to families instead of how we're ministering to adults and how we're ministering to students.
One more question for you. Can you address the authority issue? Of course, in a church, the senior pastor is going to have that authority. But are there some ways that the senior pastor can share that authority with the youth pastor? Yeah,
there are. But I think before we even talk about that, we've got to talk about value systems. And one of the things while I was doing the studying, the research for this book, I was shocked by something that I came across, which was different value systems that youth pastors and senior pastors have. It's really interesting. Senior pastors really value authority or respect from a standpoint of time served. So if you've been in a church 25 years, you went to Dallas Theological Seminary, you put your time in, you were an associate pastor, you became a senior pastor, you deserve respect. But most youth pastors today, they think that authority comes from impact. You've had major impact in this town. You've dealt with some issues in this city. You've helped this congregation grow spiritually. And they're willing to value or respect you if you've had impact. And so we got two value systems at work. One's based on time and one's based on impact. And if the two don't understand that, then they can't really understand one another. And so I think one of the things that they can do to actually overcome that is understand the value system of the other person. So the youth pastor can look at the senior pastor and say, you know what? Tell me about your life experience. Tell me about your ministry experience. Tell me about what you've learned, what you've gone through. And they can begin to respect that senior pastor because of the many experiences that they have had serving in God's kingdom. And at the same time, the senior pastor can say to the youth pastor, hey, tell me about some of the dreams you have to impact students. What are some of the things that you'd like to see happen? You know, where is it that you want to go, and what would it look like for you to have impact in this town and with this group of students that you're working with? And as those conversations progress, I believe that each one of them will see the value that each other have, and they'll be able to work together based on that. But if the senior pastor says, no, my value is time served and I have authority because you haven't served much time, and the youth pastor says, no, I'm changing students' lives here and you haven't done anything. The size of our congregation has actually gotten smaller. I'm not going to respect you. Poof. Then conflict, there's never going to be a bridge. It's just going to be a big disconnect.
And for any of this disconnect to be bridged, they got to spend time together. There's got to be a relationship, it sounds like. You know what the funniest part of this, Drew, is that these are the very things that they're doing for people inside of their ministries. Yeah. But not doing it for each other. Isn't that interesting?
If you were to ask any of these senior pastors or youth pastors, what do you do to connect with somebody? They could probably tell you in a second, and they probably do it every day. But with each other, different story.
Wow. That's fascinating. Well, the thing I like so much about this book is it's not only addressing this issue, but you have all these exercises and assessments that youth pastors, either by themselves or with their senior pastor, can work through. And it's really for both the senior pastors and the youth pastors. If you can see this, you flip it here. It's got a running shoe and a dress shoe. This side's for the youth pastor. You flip it around, it's for the senior pastor. I thought that was kind of neat.
And the one reason is because we really wanted to value senior pastors. We want senior pastors to understand youth pastors, but at the same time, youth pastors have really got to understand senior pastors, because senior pastors, I believe, are God's authority in the church. And they are leading the church the best way that they can. And so youth pastors have got to respect that.
Yeah, awesome. We also, on buildingchurchleaders.com, will have a resource based on this book, on this idea, that people can access as well.
Great.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Thanks, Drew.
It's been fun.
It's fun having you here. Appreciate it.
Thanks.